Hello everyone, and welcome to the TRIRIGA Perceptive Space Applications TTEC Go session. My name is Alfredo Cortez. I'm a design architect with the IBM IoT Business Architecture and Design team. And in this session, presenting with me, we have Nityan Govindaswamy, Ankab Nenkesat, and Armelin Madsen from our application development team. Thanks for sharing some of your time with us today.
Thanks, Alfredo. Hi, everybody. My name is Ankab, and I'm going to show you my part is on the new TRIRIGA metadata objects, and I'm going to be talking about that. Yeah, we'll do that. Let me show you the slides. So for the new TRIRIGA objects that we added for the space assessment and space management applications, first of all, there are three business objects. The first one is a tri-space assessment, and it is in the tri-space allocation module. And the other two are the tri-space assessment logs and tri-space discrepancy log, which are in the tri-log modules. So the association between those three business objects are that like Alfredo just showed you guys that the space assessment, once it was created, the creator of that assessment will be able to select the building and the floor, and also the spaces will be available for the assessor, the creator, to select which spaces they want to be assessed on that space assessment. So once the assessor got the space assessment, he will just go to each space and then start doing the assessment. And once he's see that is there mismatch or doesn't have any mismatch, the space assessment log will be created per space. But the space discrepancy log will be created only when the space assessor saw that he wants to add that space need to be added a person or remove a person, or add an asset or remove an asset. So when that action happens, the space discrepancy log will be created per the space assessment log. So the summary is that the space assessment contains the space assessment log, which will be created per space, and then space assessment log will contain the space discrepancy log, but it doesn't really have to have any space discrepancy log if that space doesn't have any mismatch. So next object that we added for our applications is the field on the space class current classification, which Alfredo had been through that already. The field is named try exclude from assessment BL. So what it does is that it excludes all the spaces that fall into that classification. So that spaces will not show up on the floor plan if that space class that associated to those spaces has this exclude from assessment checked. The next one is the graphics label style. This is used in the floor plan in both space assessment app and space management app. So the graphic label that we created, it is the tri-space 00. So I'm just going to show you real quick, and then Armelin will be showing the customization on this. So I'm just going to go back to TRIRIGA, and then we go to Tools, Administration. Under that graphic section, there's a label style. So the label style, this record called tri-space 002. Right now, out of the box, we only show the tri-name TX, which is the field, the name of the space itself. So if you want, you can add more. And I'm just gonna go back to the slides. The next object that we added, just the records, is the approval requirement. We have one of that, one approval template, and one approval rule. And also the notification contents, two of the notification contents are added for our applications. And it will go over the approval, the routing processes, and also the notification. For the UX designers, right now we have four new designers that we use for the development. First of all is the model designer. The model designer is used to define the model metadata and assemble data sources. The data sources pull data from business objects, queries, or other source types. And I'm just going to show you for the space assessment and space management app. If I go to Tools, and then on the home portal here, there's a UX designers. And the first one is the model designers. Right now, out of the box, we have two only, one for the space assessment and one for the space management. So I'm just going to show you the space assessment first. For the space assessment, inside the model, that is like data sources section there. So the top data sources section here are the data source that pull data that doesn't need any context. So for example, I'm just going to show you the MySpace assessment here. So this MySpace assessment data source is the query type. So when it's a query type, we define the query name. And what this query will return is, it will return all the space assessment that assigned to the login user. And all the fields that we can use here, it's also this. All of them will need to be defined in that query. And the expose name will be used in the view file, which is the HTML file later. And in this data source, the top level data source, it can contain more than one child data sources. So the top level data source doesn't need any context, but the child data source would. So if I go to the assessment logs here, open that, the assessment log also is a query data source. And this query will have a parent context, which is the space assessment. So if I just copy this query and then go into TRIRIGA and then search for that query, and on the Advanced tab, you'll see that it has the context of the space assessment record ID there. So that's why that space assessment log, it is created as a child data source of the space assessment data source. And like I said earlier, the assessment log contains the discrepancy log. So within the assessment log data source here, you see there's a child data source again under that data source. So the child data source now, it is the discrepancy logs. So what it does return here, it will return all the discrepancy logs that is under that particular assessment logs. So if I go look at this query, it will have the context of the assessment log record ID on the Advanced tab. And then record ID here. Okay? So far, and then we're just gonna go to the space management real quick. Let me close all these. And then go to, again, Tools, and then Model Designer. And then for the space management, we also have like a bunch of data sources. But we're just going to go to the model and see that my space assessment is also there. But this is a different record than the one that associated to the tri-space assessment model. It has a different query, and also it has different child data sources. Some of them might be similar, but not all. So for example, the space assessment data source here still has the assessment log as a child data source, and the child data source still have the discrepancy log as its child data source. But if we go back to that space assessment, we can see that itself has the child data source as a discrepancy logs as well. So what does this return is, it will return the discrepancy log that associated to the assessment, not the discrepancy log that associated to the assessment log anymore, because the context of this query is changed. So we can do, it depends on how you define the context of the parent. So these are the example of the model designer and the data sources that we define for the space assessment and space management. Just gonna go back to the slides again. So the next one is the Web View Designer. The Web View Designer is used to define the view metadata and assemble the HTML files. The HTML files are built with Google Polymer and the standard web components. So going back to the product again. So we'll go to Web View Designer. There are two main Web View Designers for the application. One is the space assessment and another is the space management. So if we go in there, you see a bunch of like HTML files. If you click in there, and then you can start download that. But then there's like another efficient way to, you know, sync the file and create the file, update the file. So here is the example of the one of the HTML files that we have for the space assessment. So inside there's like CSS, Polymer, and then HTML files, and also JavaScript, something like that. Okay. Next, I'm going to the next designer. Is called the model and view. The model and view is to tie together the model metadata and view metadata. Just go back to TRIRIGA and open the model and view designer. Again, there are two records right now, one for space assessment and one for space management. What it does is it will just specify, we just need to specify which model and which view name will be for this application. So this one for the space assessment will say the model will be the space assessment, and then the view name also be the space assessment. For the management, it will be for model will be space management, and the view name will be space management. So the last designer, it is the application designer. The application designer is used to define the application metadata, and then it will be the final layer that pulls the model and view metadata. And go back to TRIRIGA, Tools, Application Designer. Again, there are two records, one for space assessment, one for space management. And then it will just specify the app type, which is only one, web model and view. And then it will you just need to specify what app name will be used for this application metadata. And that's all from me. Next, I'm gonna hand it over to Nityan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ankya. I'm going to share. Okay, I'm going to talk about a routing process, like how the reviewer will be found by the process, and how we implemented the reviewer finding process. So basically, the approval engine we are using to identify the reviewer. So if we did little bit changes, not to the approval engine, in addition to the existing approval engine, other workflow we wrote to find only the reviewer part instead of a notification, all those things sending to the end user. It is going to just run the process and it is going to find only the reviewer. The advantage with this of using approval engine, you can configure the way approval you configure currently, and it uses same methodology to go through those approval requirement records and everything, and it finds the right approver and associate to the assessment. So that's the one. Other thing is by out of the box, we are configured our review process. It will basically look into the space manager of the assessment, assessment's location. For example, if you create a building A on building A, floor 1, you are creating as an assessment. If you have a space manager at the floor or at the building or much higher level, in the property or in the root level, the approval engine keep moving up and finding the right reviewer for this one. This way you have a better control to set, for the whole property level. If you want to set as a one space manager, you can set the space manager at the property level. Any assessment created under that property, if you have 10 buildings and all the buildings assessments will be approval will go to the one space manager. Like that, you have so many flexibilities with this approval engine and this combination. And also assessment, when you can create in two ways, and how the review process works a little different in both the places. If you create from the space assessment, the assessment, the creator will be assigned automatically, and it will go through the review process based on the new approval reviewer finding process we implemented on this process. And if you create space management, if you create assessment from space management, you can find another assessor, and also the review process, it will not go through the review process. The manager, whoever creates the assessment from the management app, he will be the responsible person for the approval. So, in other words, management app doesn't use, if you create assessment from management app, it does not use the approval process and finding a reviewer process, whatever we implemented on this release. So if you take a look at into the diagram, this is how it goes. The assessor completes the assessment, and then assessment, we create a new find reviewer process. It goes to the find reviewer process, and it uses the approval engine. And then if reviewer found, then it goes the assessment to the assessment completion state, and also it sends notification to the reviewer, and the assessment assigned to the reviewer for the review. And then manager will review the assessment and apply the changes. Then record goes into the assessment completed, and it will become read-only. And if doesn't find the reviewer, then what happens is it sends the notification to the assessor who assessed the assessment, and it goes the notification that I'm not able to find a reviewer for this assessment, and please work with administration to set it up rightly so that it can find the reviewer for this assessment. And then you can the assessment will be put it into the in progress state, so the assessor can resubmit and recomplete the assessment, so it will go and find the reviewer. So I'm going to go through to the app and show you guys how we did this. So basically we added workflow under the existing approval and try routing, approval. And if you go and look into it, that there is a one workflow, new workflow we added. This is like, try approval synchronous calculate reviewers. This is the workflow. Actually, it finds the reviewers for this assessment, and also approval notification and approval requirements. So we have approval requirement for the space assessment. So if you go in here, so we have approval requirement and approval requirement as approval template, and template as a role, and role. And for that role, we set it up currently space manager role, and also link records associated location. That's the rule we set up. For customization, you can control whatever the way you want and however you want. That's a more flexible way for the finding the reviewers for this one. And also for the notifications, we created a couple of records, and those will be used once the assessment will be, the assessor completes the assessment. Once it finds the reviewer, it sends a notification to the reviewer that assessment waiting for the review. At the same time, other one, like if doesn't find the assessor, and the same other notification will be sent to the assessor that system not able to find the assessor. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint now, and I'm going to the next page. The next topic I'm going to cover is licensing and security. And we have a space apps requires at least any one of these licenses listed on the slide, like a real estate manager or facilities manager or workplace operations and capital projects, integrated workplace manager anywhere, or real estate manager for cloud. So any one of these licenses, if you add it into your profile, you will be able to access the app. And other thing is I'm talking about security groups out of the box. TRIRIGA Space Manager and Planner as a complete control. They can have both access to both apps, and they can create an assessment on both the places. Whereas in the TRIRIGA Space Assessor, you will not be having access to the Space Management app, and you will have access to execute only the space assessment out of the box. Again, this security you can be controlled by a customer. If they want, assessors should be able to create. Yes, they can go and give access to that specific security group. One more thing I need to talk about is contact security, which is a new thing for this release. Actually, when ANCAP went through that. So there is, in the model level, we have a contact security. If you go into the space assessment, and if you open the space assessment, any data source, if you open my space assessment, there is a new flag enable the contact security flag. So what it does basically, right, the others will not be able to see other information not related to them. For example, the assessment is assigned to me, and by modifying the URL or anything, some other person will not be able to see the assessment. The contact security, it controls like that. If you don't enable that, easily by changing the URL, you can go and look other information also. So that is also implemented on this release. And I think that's it from me, and I'll turn it over to Armelin.
Hi everyone, so my name is Armelin. I'll be covering application customizations. in the context of the space applications that you have just seen. I'll just going to do an overview of customizations and debugging. I won't go into too much detail since there will be other T-Techs that will discuss the application, the UX framework, and how we could use that. So at the very end, there's in our reference materials, we have a link for all the other T-Tech Go sessions that are going on right now. So these are the points that I'll be covering. So we are using the TRIRIGA UX framework. We currently code in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and on top of that, we have Google Polymer. Google Polymer allows us to create custom components that we can use. So regular like table tags or an HTML table or paragraph, things like that. We can now create our own elements that we can reuse, not only in our app, but in other apps as well. The web view sync, that's a screenshot here at the bottom. It's a command line that we download, that you as a user would download, and this would give you these commands. You could pull all these HTML view files. You could push whatever changes that you need to make, and it'll take care of editing. You could edit it on your own machine, and it'll push it to the server. I'll also be covering customization scenarios. So we'll go through adding and removing fields, modifying graphic labels, and modifying workflows tied to an action. I'll also be going through debugging tips. So as we go along during our customization scenarios, after the slide, I'll touch up on a lot of these things. So we'll be using the Chrome Web Developer tools, and we'll show the elements of that. And then I'll also be demonstrating how to use existing TRIRIGA tools to debug anything that's on the UX framework. So reports, workflows and workflow instances, and server logs. I'll be going through that during my demo. And lastly, I'll also talk about TRIRIGA UX custom components. There are a couple, there are several in our library that's made by TRIRIGA that runs on top of Google Polymer. And there is documentation on this in TRIRIGA, so I'll point that out to you guys as well. So as I go through my scenarios, I'm going to assume that I'll have some knowledge of the technologies that I just mentioned, and that I'm relatively new to this code, so I can point out tips along the way. But in the interest of time, I'll have a couple of things that are pre-set up for the intention of this demo. So our first scenario was adding and removing fields. So let's drill into one space assessment. So for this adding and removing field scenario, our goal is to change, so when we select the space, this currently shows the space name. We are going to change that to use the space ID. And we are also going to remove occupancy, just this read-only field that just gives us more information about the space. And we'll also be adding another field in the same section called just the barcode field. So as we go along, there are a couple questions that will be answered. So for this for this scenario, we're going to cover how to find the code and where to edit it. So first of all, we know that we want to add and remove a certain number of fields. So to do that, we'll have to see what fields are exposed to us in the UX framework. So ANCAP and Nithian has mentioned the model designer. We'll go through and find space assessment, and this covers all of our data. So we know that we're using my space assessments, and the section here covers space details. So we would look for space details, and it looks like this is it, spaces for assessments. So once we drill into that, we find out what fields are exposed to us as developers for the UX framework. So when we wanted to get ID, and this is the row for ID, and it looks like it's there. And then there's also a barcode that we wanted to see, and luckily for us, it's also there. If we wanted to add a new field, we would have to, this is a configurable query that we can use ourselves. So you would just edit a TRIRIGA query, and this is the name of that query, and you would just add that field. And there's nothing special there. It's just regular TRIRIGA query stuff. Another thing to note is there's like the our field names that we know that are the column names, but what we're going to be using in our view HTML files are the exposed names. So we'll need to remember ID and barcode. Now, one thing that's helpful to know is the exposed name. It's a Google Polymer standard that we need to have it camel cased, and just it has to be. It's a web compatible name. So we can't have spaces, we can't have special characters, things like that. And it's usually just lowercase versions of their lowercase and camel case versions of their field name or name. So now that we've established that these fields are in there, we'll have to find where the code is. So this page is made up of custom elements that we have developed, and we're going to be using the element inspector. So as you guys notice, there's a debugger that's open here. You can open it by using F12, or you can find it here in the menu. So what we'll do is we're going to inspect elements so that we can find what file we're going to edit. So we wanted to edit this section, and we'll inspect the element. So notice that we went into like a child element, and we would want to see the bigger, the containing element, the container element that holds all of these elements. So I would just, as a developer, I would look through the DOM tree. Luckily, Chrome Web Developer Tools are super helpful in this. We would find that there's TriComp Space Details panel, and it highlights the details panel, and that's what we want. So I'm kind of fast forwarding, trying to make it so that I'm sure it might take a while, but once you get the hang of it, it'll be easier. So now we know that it's in the TriComp Space Details panel file. We'll go over into sources and look for them. You would find the main view, TriView Space Assessment, and you can open the Space Details panel. Interest of time, I've got it open right here. So we have now, we'll go ahead and look for our stuff. So here is the name that we were using, selected space dot space, and space is just the name. So instead, what we want to do is remove this and just use selected space dot ID. Now this is the part where we'll open our editor, and our editor could be anything, any editor, text editor that's out there. So I've got the same file opened here, and I'll find that same line. So it was like line 214 over there, and it should be the same line here as well. So what we'll do is we'll remove space. Let's keep this span. And selected space in these curly braces this is our data. This is the data that we got from TRIRIGA. And like I said, I won't go into too much detail about this, but there's a triplat DS, a data source that's giving us this object. And it basically holds all the information, all the fields that we declared in the model designer. So now we'll just put in selected space.id. I mentioned earlier that we have a tool, a command line tool, WebView Sync, and right now it's syncing. I put in the command for sync, and it looks like it pushed my changes. Now all we need to do is go back to our space assessment and refresh. So now right now we'll select on a space, and we'll see that it's populating. It used to be using the name, which is 200, and now it's using the ID. So next, we wanted to remove the occupancy field. So let's go and find that. So it looks like it's in the same component, so I'm still in the right file. And then I'm going to look through what I have. So I see type, and then I see occupancy. So removing the occupancy field is just as simple as highlighting and deleting it. It looks like it pushed, and then I'll refresh again to see if the changes were made. So let's select the space. Looks like occupancy is gone, so that's great. This is all good news for us. So now we want to add barcode. So there's a bunch of, depending on what you're editing, you might run into like styling issues that you would have to tackle. But for now, we are going to just copy and paste what we have here. So the label, well, that's pretty easy. We'll just need to change the label to barcode. And then this is the value. So we'll just put in barcode. Now we'll just fill in the blanks here. All this time we've been pushing it to the server, and we can refresh. So it looks like barcode is null. So it's showing the hyphen. And let's say there is a barcode for this space, and we're trying to figure out why isn't it showing up and stuff like that. So what we want to do, some helpful tool that we can use is triplat debug, and you'll see the tag littered in the file. So what you want to make sure is to have the triplat debug import in, and it looks like it's imported. And you can copy and paste this, or you can also look into our documentation. This is the documentation that I was talking about earlier. There's a bunch of components that are available to UX framework developers. And right now, we want to look for triplat debug, and you can read more. Here's the tag, the syntax, and the properties that I need to put in. So I come back and say, okay, I need to find barcode, and I type in the same thing, selected space dot barcode, and see if that's going to work. We'll go ahead and refresh. So what triplat debug does is it prints out whatever Polymer property we have to the console. So right now it's not printed out because we don't have a space selected. So if we do select a space, it should print our selected space dot barcode. Now notice that it hasn't been printed, so there must be something wrong. We'll go ahead and look at our space, our model again to see what's up. So it looks like barcode, we've been using the wrong name for barcode. Barcode here is all lowercase, while we were using a capital C instead of a lowercase c. So now this is your like aha moment, and like I did do this on purpose, so so that I could get this point across. This exposed names are case sensitive, needs to match whatever we put in the model designer. Let's go ahead and change that wherever we put it in. So there's barcode here, and also here. So I've hit save, and I'll refresh, and let's see where that takes us. Now we can verify whether or not this barcode is really null or if we're just getting bad data, like we were previously. So it looks like there is a barcode. Thank goodness we did that and went through all this exercise with triplot debug and selected space. This is what we had asked triplot debug to print out for us. So that's great. Things look good. And looks like we've accomplished all our goals for this scenario. I'll comment out the debug just for it to be clean. So again, our goals were to change this from the name, using the space name, to the space ID. We removed occupancy field, which used to be here, and it was a second field, and now we've added barcode. So now we've covered adding, removing a field. So another thing that so the next scenario that we want to talk about is, ANCAP had already mentioned it earlier, with graphic styles. So here, notice that now we're using the ID of a space. So if I zoom in on a floor plan, notice that I still have, these don't match. So it could probably be confusing to a user. So as an application developer, I would want to think about the user and say, okay, well, let's change this now and make it match the ID. So in order to do that, we'll go into label styles, and you can reach this from tools, administration, graphics, and label style. So you would tap this, and you'll get this page. The label style that we want, that the space assessment and space management, the space assessment and space management apps are using is TriSpace 002. So all we need to do is, our goal right now is to change the field. We don't want it to be name, we want it to be ID. So sorry, that might have been too fast. So I opened TriSpace 002. And I looked over here under label elements. It defines, well, our label elements for the graphic. And in this form, we can choose whatever field we want. And easy for us, we can just choose ID. I'll go ahead and save and close. Save and close. Once that's done, I'll go ahead and refresh. So we'll zoom in on our graphic again, and it looks like our graphic labels have now turned into what it now matches our IDs, which is great, and that was what we wanted. So moving on to our more complex scenario, right now we're going to try and replace a workflow, that runs on a button press. So this button, this complete button, is hooked to a workflow on TRIRIGA, and it uses an action that's defined in the model designer. So now for this scenario, our goal is when tapping the complete button, we want to use our own workflow instead of whatever workflow is whatever workflow is there out of the box. And some questions that you may ask, like this is how I would approach it if I were new and didn't know much about the code that I'm looking at, is which workflow is currently called? How do I find out what workflow is called so that I can modify it or replace it or anything like that? And then the next question would be, how do I change it to use whatever workflow I want? So we'll kind of do the same steps that we did in the first scenario with the add and remove field. So we know that this is the button for sure, and we'll inspect the element. And again, our aim is to find the target component, the component that's holding this entire this button. So it looks like it's a div, et cetera, et cetera. So you would want to find non-standard HTML elements. So like you wouldn't, it's not a div, that's for sure. This is not the parent element. These divs aren't. Then you run into try comp assessment header, and this is something that we've made, and it's probably a component. So we can go ahead and look into that. There is a shortcut on opening sources. You could hit Control-O, and you can just start typing. And assessment header is the first one. It's already opened. We'll go ahead and look for that button. So let's pretend we didn't see this because it's like right in our face. So instead, we can try and look for complete. And a simple word search will help you find that button. And it looks like the button on tap would call this function, this JavaScript function, handle action tap. So I'll copy that, and then all I did was hit Control F and pasted handle action tap in the find, and I looked for this function, and it looks like it's firing an action. It's firing an event called action. So this .fire, these are functions that are provided by Polymer, and you can read more about it in the Polymer documentation. But for now, we'll kind of follow this trail where this action stuff will lead us. So knowing that it fires an action, I would need to find out who takes advantage of this event. So there's an event that's fired. Someone's got to be listening to it. Somebody's got to capture that event and do something when that event is fired. So in the interest of time, we would do the same exercise, right? We would inspect element and stuff and look for the parent. But again, for the interest of time, I'll fast forward and say, oh, I found it. Try page walkthrough. That's where it's being called. And just to make sure, I would hit the find again, just a string find on the Chrome Web Developer Tools. And when capturing an event, you could either do this, like look for on action. So on is a keyword. So it'll be like, it's kind of like on tap. So tap is the event. On is like its modifier, I would say. So on action looks like it opens a confirmation dialog, and again, I go and track that down. So what this does, for the interest of time, I'll explain what this does, and we'll proceed with whatever we have to do for the rest of the demo. So this opens a confirmation dialog, and it gives you the option of yes or no. And once you hit yes, you'll it'll actually fire the complete action. So I'll go ahead and find that real quick. So there's this complete assessment, and I've already put on a little bookmark here. You see this breakpoint. So now that we found the kind of the endpoint of where the UX framework, this perceptive application, ends, and where it meets the TRIRIGA server, and the TRIRIGA server activates this space assessment, we want to see it in action and see, what's happening. How do we determine what's going on here? So I'll go into a complete assessment and see if I can complete it. So it looks like there's just more investigative work. It's using the assessment data source, which is the MySpace assessment, and it's coming from an action group called Default Actions, and it's using the action complete. So I would, again, go to my model and look for MySpace assessments. This was my assessment DS that was declared in my view HTML file. So things are getting a little familiar, like, oh, default actions, that's what I was looking at. So I would obviously click on this, and then I would look for my complete action. So here's my complete. If I maximize this a little bit, I'll look, investigate a little more, and I find a column called workflow name. And now I found the workflow. So that answers the first question, right? When we started all this, which workflow is currently being called? So now that we found the workflow, we'll look at it in Workflow Builder. So it's in TriSpace Allocation module in the TriSpace Assessment BO. Again, just Control Find, and it looks like this is the workflow that was being called. TriSpace Assessment UX complete. So we solved our first problem, finding that workflow. So now what we want to do, I've just set up a copy of that workflow and put in TTech demo. So we're going to switch it out to use this one. So I just wanted to show real quick what another debugging tool that we could use. You would have to turn on workflow instances, but you would hit select this workflow and then list all instances. And these are all the workflow. So whenever we tap that button, this workflow gets called and it's logged here. So we're going to try that and see if we hit this button. That's our theory, right? We hit this button, this workflow is called, and it's going to be here. So we'll try that. Earlier, I mentioned this breakpoint, and this breakpoint will just help us. It's just like if you were coding in Java in Eclipse. This is a breakpoint is the same type of mechanism here. Once it hits this part of the code, it'll stop, and you can actually investigate what's going on. So we'll hit complete, and we'll hit yes. This is the dialog I was talking about earlier, and it stopped at this code block like we had asked it to. So we'll go look at this, and looks like everything's going fine, and we'll hit continue. Notice that it's gone. Alfredo kind of covered this in his demo. It's now in the Space Management app queue. Now what we want to do is go back and look at our workflow instances. So this is the workflow. We'll hit list all instances. And this was 3:23:48 p.m. This was a minute ago. So this is our workflow. And it was called, called Armalin Test 428. And it looks like everything is great. It looks like this is the workflow that's being called. Now what we want to do is change it so that it uses the other workflow. So we would want to use this workflow instead. So at this point, all we're going to do is highlight the name, make sure that you don't cover any trailing spaces or anything like that. We will go back to, I had this window open still. This is where we found out that it was using the complete workflow. Now what we want to do is, instead of using this workflow for the complete action, we want to use our own. So right now, it used to be complete, now it's complete T-Tech demo for the purposes of this demo. We'll go ahead, save and close this. So we've just saved our action group. And now we can investigate. We want the same thing to happen. We want to click on the complete button, and we want to see a workflow instances now for this workflow instead of the old one. So we can go into this, and we'll say, I guess he's not supposed to be there, and this guy's good, no one's supposed to be there, this guy's good too. Now we can hit complete. We'll hit yes. Notice that it hit our breakpoint again, which is great, and that's what we want it to do. Looks like our assessment is gone as well. And now we'll have to go through here and find out if a workflow instances is logged here and that it was called. So it looks like this is our moment of truth. Like, yay, it actually called the workflow that we wanted it to call. And this workflow is like a symbol or whatever. It's whatever workflow you want. And there's nothing special here. This uses TRIRIGA workflows. And apart from configuring the action group and the action itself, this is all you need to do to hook up a workflow to a button on a UX app. So that kind of concludes customization for our applications. I just want to note that there are a lot of other ways to develop and debug. I just hope that this has helped kind of give the idea of how to do it, and of course you guys will definitely learn more as you go, because this doesn't get learned in a day. So now this concludes our T-Tech Go presentation for the Perceptive Space applications. At the very end of our slide deck, we have our reference materials. You guys can go and look through what we have there. Another thing that we wanted to note is that there is a combined live Q&A call on January 14, 2016 that you guys can join if you have any questions, any comments or suggestions that you have. We'll be on that call, and we'll also help you guys if you have any concerns, any questions that you need answered. And with that, thank you for your time, and we hope that you find this presentation